The New Age was immediately a production of a large and growing degeneracy among the European aristocracy and financier families. The relatively plebeian intellectual figures of the New Age movement, as Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, were under the patronage of such wealthy degenerates. It was impossible to conceal these class connections of the fascist movements. The popular notion of class affiliations and enmities of the communists views fellows such as Corliss Lament as, quote, defectors from their social class, and rejects out of hand the notion that any large component of the wealthy upper classes could have sponsored communist insurrections. The very idea of such class connections puts the popular delusion into jeopardy, that politics is arranged from left to center, from right to center to left. People will tolerate refutation of those ideas they have reached by processes of reason. They will more rarely tolerate any further discussion of evidence contrary to their delusions. That is the only honest reason the phenomena of the trust are either ignored or fundamentally misinterpreted strategically. So I guess, he talks about the French Jacobins' leadership and the Paris mobs, and if we trace the history of European radicalism from the Jacobins through Mazzini's Young Europe and Young America conspiracies into the formation of the socialist and communist movements of the present century, and the functional coincidence of the New Age and trust as institutions, the popular prejudices are supplied devastating refutation. At that point, real comprehension of the trust begins. And, he goes, basically he says radicalism of the right and left righties has been controlled predominantly not by wealthy people in general, but by a well-defined faction among the wealthy. And the required definition is the international mobilization for and against our war of independence. Okay, so here goes there. It all comes back to, who is on the side of, the American Revolution, and these dramas, continue to kind of play themselves out. I mean, I guess, now he says about Crowley here, just to get into, okay, yeah, there's a whole little thing about Crowley here. Yeah, right, Crowley's organization is the major trust-linked counterintelligence adversary inside Britain, the Commonwealth, and the USA Today, as we've already indicated some of the extent of that. This is the organization which produced the recreational drugs movement in the USA. It was Crowley's organization which invented and still controls, quote, the rock industry. Without this organization and its powerful protectors and promoters, Sino-Soviet narco-terrorist warfare against the United States would have been impossible. The rock, drug, sex counterculture, the principle of regular warfare weapon exploited against us by Sino-Soviet intelligence capabilities, is of the form of Event Z. The Crowley organization is X, and those deployed in X's actions to produce Event Z are Y. The Crowley organization, X, is the majority of the Anglo-American Canadian membership of today's revived version of the Trust. The demonstrable practical connections of sundry aspects of the New Age to both the Trust and to Moscow and Beijing directly are abundant. By statistical correlation alone, the New Age and the Trust overlap to such a degree that they are virtually one and the same. However, we require proof of principle more precise than inductive statistical reasoning. We wish to be able to aim precisely at the head of the snake, if we find it necessary to do so, rather than wishfully throwing random pattern fire into the snake's general vicinity. Snake, interesting. We must know the beast and its habits so precisely that we can adduce his most vulnerable flanks from his organization and nature. Our object must be to destroy the infrastructure of this organized criminality. We shall not succeed all at once. Massive, hard investigative work and evaluations must be done in the course of improving war plans for our conduct of irregular warfare. A correct scientific definition of the problem's nature is an indispensable guide to investigations and estimates, but it is not a substitute for the hard work to follow. We need a veritable army of professionals dedicated to planning and winning this war, but the army must be unified around a correct definition of both the face of the enemy and the creature's species-determined habits and vital interests. Okay, whoa.
That was quite a passage. I honestly find the idea of... I think that the identification of Nietzsche with the New Age is actually kind of, astute in a way. I don't know,
yes.
If it's astute in the way that he means it, but same with Dostoevsky to an extent, but I almost think that the idea of communism as part of the New Age is interesting too, but I feel like he maybe should have some, because he, I think, really is a New Ager as well, in many respects.
Beyond psychoanalysis.
Yeah,
laser beam
weapons. Has that, level of self-reflexivity in his thought, but I feel like he really is. And I mean, just really, if you are, I mean, maybe this kind of indicts us, but I feel like if you are, if you're, like, involved in these little internecine fights, like, with, sniping at Crowley, like, in a way that kind of almost, if your, like, theory of the world, like, is kind of, sort of around Crowley, that kind of, I guess, like, maybe in an intellectual history sense, sort of, like, inherently makes you a New Ager, I feel like, if, like, your
but at the same time,
like, view of the motor of history is, like, New Age stuff, like, but, you just have an alternative take on, like, I don't know, but
but the type of New Age activity and thought that he's describing does not sound like obvious, self-evidently flows out of the Bolshevik, doctrine or whatever. If anything,
no, there's, like, a lot of leaps, and that I think is, like, a general. I mean, like, we were just reading stuff where he said, like, it all goes back to, like, Mesopotamian, like, cults of, like, Mithras.
Actually, he says it right here. He says it right here a little later. That basically he talks about how Russia has a cultural. They don't have an economic problem in matching us, but they have a cultural one because the Raskolnik, the Russian archetype that he's talking about, is a passionate cultural traditionalist. And he basically, but then he ties it to literally everything, and says that that basically the peasant problem that the Soviets call that of the Raskolnik is one aspect of Soviet motives for backing the environmentalist and post-industrial movements in the West. Russian cultural policy will not permit Russian economic policy to adapt to high rates of generalized technological attrition in basic industry in agriculture. Only in a fully rational form of culture do rational forms of economic considerations induce nations to adapt their cultural policy to economic science principles. And he goes, this is some real LaRouche fire here. The foregoing points of illustration illuminate the fact that to understand Bolshevism, we must understand how the process of evolving a design for Bolshevism was addressed to the indicated paradoxical feature of Dostoevsky's program. What, in short, is the difference between Peter the Great's program of westernization and the Bolsheviks' industrialization policy? The secret is to be found in the grotto of Alex Munth's Isle of Capri, where New Ager Maxim Gorky molded the cultural policy of the future Soviet state. The mindset of the New Age's authors and leaders is a deeply mystical one. What is called often symbolic philosophy is their alternative to reason. Astrology, witchcraft, paganist varieties of cult rituals, and a magician's trickery are the hallmarks of such mystics' mental life. At the center of the unleashing of the program for the dawning of the age of Aquarius was the adoption of the figure of the Emperor Tiberius as the model incarnation of the Antichrist, and a resurrection of Tiberius's Mithra cult center, the Isle of Capri, as the spiritual center of the movement. The chief priest of the cult on Capri was the notorious Alex Munthe. To this center, leaders of fascism, such as Hitler's emissary, Hermann Goering, were drawn on pilgrimages. Here, Maxim Gorky gathered the Bolshevik leaders for instruction in what he was fashioning as the future Bolshevik culture. Bolshevik culture is a dichotomized one, the sword of iron subordinated to the sword of the spirit. Gene Dixon, using computers to churn out marketable horoscopes, is in keeping with Bolshevik culture. Soviet industrialization must be seen in this light. Russian science and industry are, for the Bolshevik soul, a necessary evil, the sword of iron. Bolshevism proper is the mystical sword of the spirit. The spirit belongs to the mother of Satan, Matushka Rus. Thus, in technical matters, the Bolshevik is rational, but only up to a point. On matters which touch the essence of Bolshevism, he is a raving Russian mystic, a Raskolnik. Okay, he says that in Augustinian civilization, though, art, religion, and the spirit of scientific inquiry are one and the same. The experience and celebration of the unity of truth, beauty, and agape are the essence of Western classical fine art. In these things we are at peace with ourselves. We are at home, come in from the hurly-burly of daily conflict to renew ourselves spiritually for the struggles of the coming day. I'm about to get triggered. See the Russian professional musician attempting to perform form the classical repertoire. He is typified by an extraordinary degree of physical proficiency, but he makes everything sound like an echo of drunkenly sentimental Red Army soldiers singing Kalinka. With few exceptions, his mind cannot capture...
Okay.
With few exceptions, his mind cannot capture the essence of classical composition. He simply does not know what it is all about. He is a romantic, like Richard Wagner's circle, like Schopenhauer, like Rilke, and so forth. For him, the rigorous rationalism of the classical repertoire, in which creativity is of the form of mental activity associated with scientific discovery, is an alien thing in which he finds no pleasure. In art, he mistakes rigor for the mechanistic, as the Russian neoclassicals attempt to do. He prefers unbridled, irrationalist sentimentality. This is the state of mind with which he undertakes the painful duty of technological progress. Thus, all of the most gifted Soviet scientists walk the perilous edge of heresy to Bolshevism. Outwardly, the heresy is to Friedrich Engels' lunatic concoction of dialectical materialism, the formal source of that radical nominalist jiggery-pokery called Bolshevik diamat and histomat, the mechanistic view of Descartes, but with a magical element added in. The truth is that science as such is itself already heresy to Bolshevism. It is something with which Matushka Rus eyes as evil to her, something she is obliged to tolerate for sake of establishing Moscow as capital of the Third Rome. She permits some Russians to occupy themselves with this sinful practice, a practice of which she hopes to purge herself once the empire is consolidated. The leading New Agers, such as Bertrand Russell, always view the Bolsheviks as so many characters from a Dostoevsky novel.
That's a weird association.
On this, they were never deceived. The Bolsheviks were, for them, the new berserker Vikings sent against Charlemagne's order, the new Mongol hordes. Was it not satanic of Russell and others to favor the looting of Western civilization by such a pestilence? Of course, they are as satanic as the London Hellfire Clubs of the 18th century, as satanic as Crowley professed himself to be, and proud of it. Of course, many features of Bolshevism disgusted them, but they viewed it as a necessary evil, a lesser evil in the Augustinian principles expressed by the American Revolution. They saw the Taoist traditions of China and the Russian Raskolniki as the leading candidates to serve as an armed cultural force for destruction of Augustinian civilization, with a bit of Sufism thrown in. For the 20th century, for the 20th century, they saw the Russian Empire as the most credible selection, and Taoist China culture perhaps a future successor. This view by the New Agers has produced 2 world wars, fascism and Bolshevism during this century, with outright Satanism coming up as the new form of this pestilence. The course of events so unfolded transformed the sponsorship of the Russian Revolution into an uneasy but otherwise efficient partnership with the entity created. That partnership, so defined, is the organism to which we must correlate all of the relevant facts of irregular warfare. Wow.
That was a doozy. That was something. That was the first mention of Islam that he's made that I found. His first
Interesting.
Mention of, probably something to do, like, peripheral 9/11, he probably made some, but, in his more philosophical writings, with all this religious philosophy and theology, this is the first Muslim topic, or Islamic topic. He mentioned a very weird throwaway reference, that was something.
Quite a lot of weird throwaway references in there, basically alleging that, on the one hand, he does say elsewhere that, the Beatles were a British psyop, cooked out of the psychological warfare department.
He's all about, it's very bizarre, because, in that one, he almost seems to kind of be a little bit anti-China. He does, saying that China, could be a fertile ground. Yeah, so it's weird, I did definitely point out that, despite, the fact that he'll be, very vociferously, anti-Nazi, I guess, insofar as, he uses the association with, Nazism to, criticize the things he doesn't like. He also, he'll say, the Nazis made up this, they promoted this pitch or whatever.
Yeah.
But then he'll be other cultures that don't have figural art or whatever, or that don't,
I bet he has a problem with
Da Vinci,
that.
or or don't have this type of classical music, don't have classical music in this type of style, don't specifically even 19th century romanticism is too, even Schopenhauer is too much for him.
I know, right?
That's So that like
Yeah.
inherently is like incredibly culturally chauvinistic. I was
Yeah.
listening to like a talk by from 2015 before LaRouche's death. That was it was talked by Megan Beats, who I guess is a
Okay.
LaRoucheite.
Yeah.
And she you know, was kind of, I guess, just recapitulating a talk that LaRouche had given. And, you know, she was basically, it was about Verdi tuning. And she was talking about, you know, how the music of the spheres or whatever corresponds with the you know, the planetary motions, and Kepler corresponds with this solfeggio scale, or like stuff like that. And, you know,
solfeggio scale, yeah.
Yeah, and she says, like, you know, this has, you know, this goes back to the core of what Western philosophy is all about. You know, I do want to transition to the Verdi tuning soon, but like just as
we should talk about that.
Like, but you know, just as a preview of that. But yeah, then you know, she says this whole thing about Western civilization, and then she goes like, and also, you know, this is similar to what you might see in Confucius, you know, which is to me like so weird and almost like fake, because for one, like you know, of course, like, you know, classical China didn't have like music like Verdi at all. You know, like Western ears, generally speaking, especially ones that are extremely like, you know, selective and have like very snobbish opinions about music, tend to kind of not like Chinese opera and such things. But like it's kind of like this weird thing where somehow all of a sudden, like, you know, because of this weird like whatever calculus has occurred where China's good now, somehow they're like included. You know, I've actually seen that with other right-wing people, where like all of a sudden they'll be having this partiality in Confucius because he's sort of this traditionalist authoritarian, like, you know.
Well, you could see the influence on the DPRK as well, and the sort of the Kim family, and their kind of their if you want to call it, you know, cult of personality, but basically the idea that like
to have like a Confucian sort of ethos in Asia, but it's but I have noticed even Western like right-wingers, you know, sort of having this thing where, like, you know, again, just to mention another trad cat, like Adrian Vermeulen, like, or however you pronounce his name, is always like retweeting like some Confucius bot was like, the law is like, you know, the king is the father, like, you know, stuff like that, you know. It's just like etc.
Well, you know, I think if you look at modern China,
I mean, I feel like if you actually knew anything about Sufism, you might like it, because, you know, but anyway,
it's hard, or at one point like it and then denounce it as satanic.
Well, if you really, that's the thing, like, if they really, like, you know, it's not like they're citing like all these different like Chinese philosophers and critics of Confucius or whatever, you know, and stuff like that. It's like the one Chinese philosopher that everyone has heard of. Like, you know, like if you really were into Sufism, he would be like, you know, the perfidious Naqshbandi order, which like destroyed like, you know, the like what Maulana Rumi like had, you know, like, or whatever. I wouldn't rule out that kind of weird esoteric takes where he would be like, you know, like Ibn Taymiyyah was like a true, you know, like visionary. I guess that's not really an arcane take. I don't know what his thoughts on Ibn Taymiyyah would be, but anyway.
Well, that's the thing about LaRouche is like his the confidence of his hot takes. Like nobody has the sort of worked out like long form hot takes like LaRouche, where, you know, and sometimes it seems kind of evident that, you know, maybe he's read something about this, but it almost feels like unnecessary in a way. Like he's throwing down hard on some like you know, minor character in distant history, like the Baron of you know, Bourbon or something like that.
Duke of Marlborough.
The Duke of Marlborough. And how, but like, you know, denouncing him as like a satanic scum who were like representing the Mithrian cult of, and it's like, okay, wait, hold on a second. But he's on to the next one. I mean, he's a lot like, it reminds me of like Alex Jones as well, and like also the flattening of kind of like Bolshevism and fascism into, you know, they were caused by the same thing. You know, it's like Hitler took the guns, Mao took the guns, Stalin took the guns, you know, it's like that kind of thing of like, they're all like part of the globalists. So, and in a way, like, like
that would make
LaRouche has his
Adolf Hitler, Joe Stalin, and Jeffrey Dahmer, you know, like,
exactly. So he views, I mean, they really are kind of in a way, the original globalists. And I wonder to what extent Alex Jones was like influenced by LaRouche, because there's a lot of overlap. He might have gone on Alex Jones back in the day. I mean, like in the 2000s. a couple times, but those are two very big egos. I wouldn't expect them necessarily to mesh super well.
Yes. Yeah, I feel like they wouldn't mesh. Kind of like how Alex Jones hates Q. That might be a situation.
Yeah. And the LaRouche, the LaRouche Pub, like, technically is anti-QAnon from what we've been able to see. Like it's a psyop.
Yes.
That specifically.
Yeah,
Q.
right. It is anti-Q, but they're pro-Trump. Yeah, it's like they're real. Like they're Q without Q. Instead of Q, they have LaRouche.
He's kind of the original Q in a way. Like he is.
Yeah,
well, I mean,
true.
honestly,
he always would be like, "I'm getting these reports." I mean, Jim Bakker said when they were in prison, he would get like these intelligence reports and even know about like news before it happened. You know that televangelist was in jail with.
And he did have these like murky contacts, like both with like Soviet diplomats and with CIA and Pentagon officials that, you know, sometimes it's kind of like Michael Flynn and some of those other guys. It's like you're not sure to what extent they really are kind of like in the mix or to what extent they're like puffing up their own kind of like a level of access and credentials. You can never quite tell. You know, it's like when they're talking about how like President Trump needs to institute martial law right now, like that General McInerney guy that goes on the Two Mics show all the time and like literally was saying like President Trump needs to invoke the Insurrection Act and start military tribunals and start executing people.
That.
Like absolutely spot on, General. Absolutely spot on.
I don't know if I remember mentioning this in another episode, but yeah, I saw that like, you know, people were saying the COVID like stimulus bill or whatever was like a, you know, a Trojan horse for like some repeal of the Insurrection Act, so Trump wouldn't be able to declare martial law and like.
Yeah, I saw that.
You know,
I saw that.
like what the like. Yeah. Anyway.
Mr. LaRouche, I want to quote you back to yourself. This is something I read on your stationery, written by you. Quote, according to authoritative sources, Henry A. Kissinger, that's our former Secretary of State, is not a Jew, but a faggot. One does not need to catch Henry in flagrante in the Carlisle Hotel or with a Romanian waiter in Acapulco. He is of the species some psychopathologists describe as an extreme anal variety of sadomasochistic personality. Now, on the subject of psychopathologists, has any psychopathologist ever suggested to you that you ought to be locked up?
Well, what's that got to do with anything?
A lot to do with it. That's our Secretary of State.
Well,
that's one of the leading men in America.
That's our misfortune.
He also happens to be a close friend of mine. For you to say something like this suggests to me that you ought to see a psychopathologist, and I think a psychopathologist would suggest that you be locked up.
Well, Tom, I suggest you consider the fact that everything said in that statement is true.
On what grounds do you say this?
Who are the authoritative sources?
I am one of the authoritative sources. You know what
evidence do you have for
Well, I'm in the news business. I run an international weekly news magazine. We run about 1,000 people are working around the world in various capacities in that connection. That what I know about Henry Kissinger is developed from sources that know him very well and for our own direct investigations. Henry Kissinger is still screaming about the effectiveness on which we got on the inside of his entire scheduling operation as a matter of our investigation.
Was that how you got the young lady to insult him and his wife?
He wasn't insulted. The point is, Henry was walking to the airport.
Let's get that so the audience will know what we're talking about. This is where some woman walked up to Henry Kissinger when he was headed for his bypass operation and called him a fag or something.
No, she didn't. It didn't happen that way.
No, she said, do you sleep with young boys at the Carlisle Hotel? That's what she said.
Tom, you've got it wrong. You want to know what happened? Or don't you?
Well, I heard it from Mrs. Kissinger.
Well, Mrs. Kissinger is not a reliable woman. You want to know what happened or don't you?
All right, now you're a reliable man. We'll
okay, fine. Henry Kissinger was walking to the airport, and some people who are associated with me were at their usual stand at the airport. They said, Henry Kissinger. And so this young woman walked up to Henry and said, Mr. Kissinger, may I ask you 2 questions? And she asked him about the current thing that Westmoreland was having troubles at that point, the questions Vietnam thing, and asked him if he cared to say anything about that. And he said no, he didn't want to become involved. He said, well, Mr. Kissinger, may I ask you another question? Is it true that you have been involved with young boys at the Carlisle Hotel? That was not an insult. That was a straight journalistic question on a matter of fact which has been some discussion from highly reliable witnesses.
Well, look. See, highly reliable witnesses. Henry Kissinger doesn't have. I'm not a supporter of Henry Kissinger. He doesn't have enough time to sue you for putting this type of material out there. Why? Let me ask you. Why do you put that kind of material, sort of bristling with hatred and revilement, into a publication? Why don't you just criticize his foreign policy?
Look, on the question of Henry Kissinger, first of all, everything in there is true. True. And I know it, Dimitri.
Mr. LaRouche, I hope you have a lot of that money that you're raising from all your various organizations handy, because if I were Henry Kissinger, I would sue you and try to take it all. But let me ask you this one. Here's another statement of yours. David Rockefeller, Averill Harriman, and Henry Kissinger are all agents of the British intelligence service, spreading drug addiction, global famine, and the bubonic plague.
Well, you'll have
what
you will have to do is you're taking something
what kind of a statement?
Wait a minute, Tom. Hold it on. Now, come on, don't get so excited.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.